All right, let's move on to division. So yesterday we did adding, subtracting, and multiplying. Today we are going to do division. And there are two ways that you can do division. And with regular old numbers, when we were in elementary school, we would use long division, right? We would have 327 divided by 5. And we would put the 5 on the outside, we'd put the 327 on the inside, and we would divide. We'd say, how many times does 5 go into 32? We'd put that 6 up on top. 6 times 5 is 30. And then we would subtract 30 minus 32, or excuse me, 32 minus 30 is 2. Bring down your 7 and do it again. 5 times what is 27? Well, we can go in 5 times. And 5 times 5 is 25 with the remainder of 2. And then when you were in elementary school or whatever, you might have like put some decimals after that or something. But when we do division in Algebra 2, we write our remainder as a fraction. So we're going to have 65 and 2/5. As you can very well imagine, doing long division like that with polynomials, like what we have down here, like on question number 1, can be very tedious. It's very possible, and you can do long division with polynomials. However, we are going to do what's a shortcut that's called synthetic division, and it's just a little bit easier way to divide if you are dividing by a binomial. So I have written over here on the right the steps that we are going to do this, and then we just have a couple of examples we're going to do together. And once you get the hang of synthetic division, it really goes pretty quickly. So the first thing we do is, how I phrase it anyway, is I say we build our house. And in the long division question above, we built our house with a roof. Notice we have a roof up here. Well, when we do synthetic division, we actually build our house with what I call a basement. So we're gonna put it the opposite way. We build it with a basement instead of a roof. Okay, so that's step 1. We build our house. That's a pretty basic house. Step 2, we set the divisor equal to 0 and solve. And this is the number that goes on the outside of the house. So what's being divided by, that's called the divisor. If we set that equal to 0, because ultimately what we want to know is our zeros, which is where it crosses the x-axis. If we set it equal to 0, if we add 2 to both sides, we would get 2. So 2 is what is going to go on the outside of our house. And I put the 2 on the outside of the house on what I call the second floor, right? So if we think about the bottom would be the very bottom below the line would be the basement. Then we have the first floor and the second floor. So that's kind of how I think about it. I just put it in terms of building a house. And then we list the coefficients of each term on the second floor of the house. So here is what we're going to put on the inside, but all we are putting is the coefficients. So we are just going to put 4, and we're going to put it all on the second floor. 4, -13, and 10. Okay, so there we are. We did step 3, listed the coefficients. Step 4, bring the first coefficient down into what I call the basement. So we bring the first coefficient all the way down to the basement. That is down below our floor there. Okay, so we bring the first coefficient down to the basement. Step 5, multiply around and drop the product in below the second coefficient. So what that means is we multiply around, we multiply 4 times 2, and we drop it in. 4 times 2 is 8, and we just drop it in underneath of that second coefficient. Step 6 is we add. -13 plus 8 is -5, and then repeat step 5. We multiply around again. Oops, daisies. Multiply around again. -5 times 2 is -10. We add and get 0. Okay, what this means, okay, what all these numbers actually mean. Oops, daisies. Let me erase some of these little arrows here that are kind of in the way. There we go. Let me erase those. Okay, so what these numbers actually mean is this is like our remainder. We have a remainder of 0. So that means everything divided out equally, nothing left over. And then the numbers in the basement. So these numbers here represent the coefficients of the terms of our answer. So if we started out with a second power and we divided out a first power, that means our answer is going to be a first power, which means our solution is going to be 4x minus 5. And that is all we have to do. Okay, so let's try one that's got a little bit more involved going on with it. So like I said, just a reminder that these numbers that are down here in the basement represent your numbers that are going to be for your answer. And again, I got 4x instead of x squared because I had 4x and I divided out in x, which means I'm going to have 1x less. So instead of a second power, I'd have a first power. Okay, so let's look at this one. First thing I have written down here is every place has a holder, or I sometimes call it every power has a place. Which basically means if you're missing a power, you're missing an exponent, it has to have a placeholder in there. So like here, when I'm looking here, I have x to the third minus 4x plus 6x. I am missing an x squared, which means I need to have a placeholder for that. So that means my actual equation that I'm using for coefficients would be x to the third plus 0x squared minus 4x plus 6. So now I have a third power, a second power, a first power, and a constant. So now we have our equation written with all of the holding places that we need. On the one up above up here, it didn't need to have that. Okay, because let me go back up here. Because it had a second power and it had a first power. So we didn't need to have any placeholders. Again, the reason this one has a placeholder is because it's missing a second power. So when we do our steps here, we have x plus 3, which means if we set x plus 3 equal to 0, and this is a step you can really do in your head. You don't have to write this down every time, but just so you know where that number is coming from. So we are going to put a negative 3 on the outside of the house. We have our basement floor there. And then we are putting the coefficients. And again, we have if there's nothing there, there's a coefficient of 1. So I'm going to have 1, 0, negative 4, 6. Okay. I drop that first coefficient down into the basement. And I multiply around. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. I add 0 plus negative 3 is negative 3. Multiply around again. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. Add them together to get 5. Multiply around again to get negative 15. And I end up with a negative 9 right here in my last spot. Remember when I said up here, this 0 up on the top up there meant that there was no remainder. It divided evenly. Well, whatever this last number is your remainder. And we do have to deal with that when we write our answer out. Okay, so here, these are going to be our coefficients in our answer, like the numbers that go in our answer, and then this is going to be our remainder. So how does that look when we write it out? Well, we started with a third power up here. We divided out an x, which means we're going to be 1 less power. So we're going to be x squared is going to be our highest power, or the degree of our new answer. So we're going to have 1 x squared minus 3x plus 5. And then we have this remainder of negative 9, which means we're going to add that as a fraction with the negative 9 on top. And then if you remember all the way back up here from the very beginning, we divided by x plus 3, so we're going to put an x plus 3 in the denominator. And again, we are not doing anything, or oops daisies, we're not solving anything like that. We are simply, let me just circle that, I guess. We are simply just dividing and getting an answer. So that would be actually where we end. Okay, so now let's do a couple more just to get a little bit more practice at it, get a little bit quicker with our process as we do synthetic division, because we'll do this a lot in the next couple of days. Okay, so let's look here. First things first, I'm going to build my basement, right, or build my house, however you want to think about it. Okay, I'm going to do a quick check. I've got a fourth power, third power, second power. Uh-oh, I am missing my x power, so I'm going to have a 0x in there when I go to fill in my second floor with my coefficients. And so that means technically I'm going to have x to the fourth plus 3x to the third minus 2x squared plus 0x minus 5. Again, we have to have all the place fillers or it's going to mess up what our answer actually is. So if we are dividing by x minus 1, remember if we set that equal to 0, that means we are dividing by a positive 1. I'm going to put my coefficients across the top. So I'm going to have 1, 3, negative 2, 0, negative 5. And again, we just do our process just like we have with all the other ones here. And we're going to bring that first coefficient all the way down to the basement. Multiply around. 1 times 1 is 1. Add them together. 3 plus 1 is 4. Multiply around. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. Multiply around. 0 plus 2 is 2. Multiply around. And when we do that last step, we get negative 3. That last number, remember, is always our remainder. And we started with a 4th power, which means our answer is going to be a 3rd power. So we're going to have 1x to the 3rd plus 4x squared plus 2x plus 2. And then we have a remainder of negative 3 over x minus 1. Okay. All right, let's look just one more quick example here, just so you have plenty of examples to look at. If we build our house here with the basement, I've got x plus 2 over here, which means I'm going to put a negative 2 on the outside. I'm looking at my exponents here. I've got a 3rd power, a 2nd power, a 1st power, and a constant, so we're all good. We don't have any place fillers that we have to put in there. We're going to put our coefficients across the top in our 2nd floor. And then we are just going to follow that same process. We're going to bring down that first coefficient all the way to the basement, multiply around. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Add, we get negative 5. Multiply around, 10. Negative 14 plus 10 is negative 4. Multiply around, we get 8. And we ended up this time with a remainder of 0. So we aren't going to have any fraction added on to the end of this answer. And we started out with a 3rd power, and we divided out an x, which means we're going to be 1 power less, which means we're going to have a x squared as our highest degree. So we're going to have 2x squared minus 5x minus 4. And in this case, again, there is nothing else that you need to do with it. There's no remainder, so there's no fraction added on. And hopefully, as you keep doing these, you get a little bit better at it and it goes a little bit quicker so that when we do them in later sections, you'll be pretty good at it. So good luck.